Welcome to the Digital Marketing Victories Podcast, a monthly show where we celebrate and learn from the change makers in digital marketing. I'm personally obsessed with how digital marketers sell through and get their ideas executed. I'm your host, Katherine Watier. I'm the owner of WO Strategies, LLC. We focus on organic discovery for our enterprise clients with a training-centered approach. Hello, today we're joined by Chris Green. Chris has provided strategic, technical, and hands-on digital marketing expertise for more than 10 years. He's delivered SEO campaigns for enterprise brands, managed marketing campaigns, trained teams, coached other SEOs, and has spoken at industry events. And this episode is going to be perfect for you. If you've ever wondered about how you can evaluate your own skills or evaluate others in the industry based on their career goals or yours, and how to set a plan to improve those skills. If you're ever interested in how mentoring might help you and how to find a mentor in the digital marketing industry, and how to ensure that your skills, most importantly, match the areas that are going to drive the most impact for the websites that you work on in your industry. So without further ado, here's our interview with Chris Green. Chris, thanks for agreeing to be on our podcast.
Great. Thanks for having me.
So can you tell us just a little bit more about yourself and your marketing background?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I often characterize what I do to people who don't really understand it as I kind of mess around on the internet. Might be a little bit self-deprecating, but it's my background before I got into SEO had nothing to do with marketing. I mean, I finished a master's in film and literature, and I was planning to go and do sort of a route into a PhD and then lecturing. And long story short, I kind of realized that I wasn't ready for that to kind of continue that journey. And I pretty much managed to, I guess, blag my way into a job. I kind of sounded like I knew more about SEO than the person hiring me, and they hired me. And that was, and then obviously I had to come good on it. And actually in the early days, I kind of learn a lot about Google Analytics, AdWords, fundamentals of SEO copywriting, and then a few months later, after working in-house, an agency picked me up and trained me as a technical SEO. And yeah, the rest is kind of history. I sort of picked it all up as I've gone along. I mean, it's I was about to say an unconventional route into SEO, but is there a conventional route into this? I'm not sure there really is, but I've always been fascinated with the internet, with solving problems, and looking in places that other people won't look for answers. Like stitching together pieces of data that don't often get looked at side by side. And I think those things and the ability to translate technical elements into easily understandable things kind of meant that I sort of advanced pretty quickly through sort of agency. And then sort of not only was sort of lead technical on a lot of projects, but would also, do a lot of the actual account direction and then running the team. So I think it's just being really kind of curious in it and sort of not being afraid to roll up my sleeves.
That's so funny because as you were talking, I was just thinking about somebody on my team ages ago. And I kind of wonder if that combination of curiosity and fascination with the internet and analytics sort of go all together in relation to a technical SEO career, only because as you were talking, I was like, oh, that was actually his fascination too. And now he's a technical SEO. And that was my start. I got a little bit of a crash course in analytics. That was obsession of mine early in my career. And I'm a technical SEO and I was tinkering around on the internet early. Anyway, I just kind of wonder. So anyway, the part of the reason I wanted to have you on the show is that I think you'd written a post, perfect for January, of course, because everyone's sort of reassessing well, not everybody. Some of us are reassessing what they're doing with their lives in January and what you want to do with your career. Am I in the right space? There's certainly plenty of that going on with the current pandemic. Trying to evaluate whether you've got the right skills, maybe putting together a professional development plan because you're in-house and somebody's asked for it. So how do you think that SEOs, whether they're, and maybe this is different if they're in-house versus independent or an agency, how should they go about evaluating their skills and building a plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's really, I guess, what inspired me to do it, because I've, helped people progress, obviously sort of progress myself, and that there's no real benchmark, I guess, as to what good looks like really, or people don't really often agree on it. Some people will say, well, it's the results. Do you work on campaigns that generate great results? If yes, then you must be great. The longer I've done this, the more and more I think that actually, there are certain campaigns that you're only a small part in. Unless you can control everything, you could be amazing and you can still not get great results for various reasons. So that method I find is kind of lackluster and often down to luck. I often found that also some people that seem to advance really quickly and certainly who feel really confident in their skills are really, really good at telling their own story, but often less good at actually doing the job. And I'm trying not to throw shade too intensely, but that so there's this sort of disparity or shift between, well, success it doesn't always mean you're good, a lack of or lots of, but also your confidence, you can be overly confident and that doesn't reflect. So in terms of how do you assess them and find that relative to others, I think if you're in an agency or you're in a company that has a team of SEOs and a structure and people that you can work against, it's actually far simpler because you can kind of compare and contrast. You obviously see that everyone's skills, their passions or interests them, they're all sort of different, but particularly if you're in-house or you're working on your own, you're say freelance or contract, you don't often have that benefit of comparing against team members. And even if you have a team, if there's only 2 or 3 other people, it's still not the most objective way of comparing because it's based on them. So I think the whole idea of understanding, well, firstly, what are the accepted truths in our space? Are there these resources that have what the industry would generally consider good knowledge? And what's your awareness of that? That's a really good starting point. Can you read Moz's Beginner's Guide to SEO and get totally lost, or do you read it all and you kind of get it? That's quite a vague litmus test, but for me that's often a really good one, especially if I don't know where someone's skill actually lies. But then sort of more in-depth ones, then kind of focusing on specific tasks, specific skill sets. So we've already talked about analytics. Well, if you're speaking with an SEO that's not familiar with analytics or the analysis side of the job, that's going to have knock-on effects on loads of elements of what you do, even if it's not in the Google Analytics interface, because a lot of the reasoning, a lot of the problem solving and methodologies there kind of get linked. So it's kind of building up this list, as I said, these accepted truths. What do we think is important, and then working out how well do you stack up against that. I think that's if you're going to do it yourself, that's the primary way that I'd start, and then you chart from there. How confident are you against these elements, and then what do you do to close those gaps? And that last part is probably the most important, to be fair.
And do you know of any guides or resources out there that help people pull this together? Sort of mentioned the Moz's guide, but
so the Moz one is where I always start with people who are new into SEO, because it's so approachable, and it's become pretty universal in many respects, and I think that gives you a good grounding. I mean, others, other tool providers, so SEMrush, and I think most tool providers have got their own kind of forms of guides, documentation. SEMrush have their own qualifications. That's doesn't mean anything beyond you have a badge to say you've done it, but again, it sort of recognizes a good source of knowledge. Whether or not it's the most exhaustive source of data is one question, but if I know someone's been through it all, I at least know, well, I know what they've done, and I know that it's, broadly speaking, pretty on point, pretty much what you need it to be. So those resources are very good on the entry level. I think beyond that, what do you do when you're looking for much more advanced stuff? Then your actual selection choices do get a little thinner. Aleda Solis has her learning SEO.io site that she's been sort of pulling together over the sort of recent months, and that's quite quickly becoming the place that I send people the most, in the sense of, go look at this. It'll signpost you to lots of amazing resources. It's been arranged really well to covering, from basics to different niches within SEO to additional skill sets, advanced techniques. And I think that is, kind of simple as you just look at that data, look at that information, and what there scares you, what there doesn't, or do you feel you're kind of confident in, or do you think that's pretty cool, I maybe need to learn a little more? I mean, it's very self-directional though. You know, it puts a lot of emphasis on you to go and uncover those gaps. And, you know, even after you've done that and you've read those blogs and, you know, you're happy that you've read what you need to, that's the theory part nailed. I mean, the huge part of the learning process is you need to then go do it, go put it into practice, go see how it works in the real world. But that's probably a bit of a digression for the moment. But I think that's a really good source. So, like, as I said, Moz's beginner guides, you know, the SEMrush certifications are pretty useful, and then a guide like Aleda's is pretty strong. The rest kind of depends on where you are and what it is you're doing. And I guess we'll come on to talk about this a bit, is that sort of dichotomy between in-house, between agency, between contract, and those different roles, because the emphasis on what you need to be really good at is very, very different depending on where you are. And I think it's, you know, if you're an agency, it's actually very often your skill at doing the agency's processes. I mean, it depends on what type of agency and the size, but broadly, you know, most agencies will deliver to a certain pattern or template, and how good are you at delivering within that, which is usually a balance of speed and quality. Whereas in-house, it varies. You know, if you're in an SME, so a smaller business, you know, a lot of your job might not be SEO, there might be other digital marketing elements. So that's your ability to juggle. Whereas, you know, if you're working for, you know, massive websites, million plus pages, a huge amount of emphasis on your job is going to be your skill and knowledge of the platform, of the limitations of who needs to do what. And that's less of the SEO skill that you can go elsewhere to learn. It's actually more your ability of you know, kind of learning how the company works and how the web ecosystem works. So I think it becomes very situational when you get above that, you know, that base SEO level for me.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that last week. So I was chatting with photographer in Australia, of all things, but he was does quite a bit of local SEO. And I don't do a ton of local SEO at all. And he was sort of giving me an update because I wasn't reading the local SEO stuff because I don't do it much. But I was just kind of floored again. Even though I've been in the industry forever, about how specialized you need to get depending on your type of client and industry. You know, because local is its own beast some days. And so I'm kind of just wondering, if you're an SEO, obviously it makes sense for you to keep your job. So if you're working on small business stuff, that's a different track. And I heard you talk, or you were hinting at that life might get more complicated on the people end if you're working with bigger sites. Do you think that's always true?
Vast majority of cases, I think the people end of things is where the greatest challenges can come out of. And it's not me saying that I dislike working with people, but it's a lot of what we do is relatively simple. Ignore the fact that we're trying to work with, you know, the search algorithms behind Google and other search engines that are, you know, black boxes that can change at a moment's notice. The support they give you may or may not be accurate, and, you know, the SEO is kind of like you're trying to wrestle with water anyway. But the accepted truths and the knowledge that we've got are fairly straightforward. You know, if you're going to migrate a website, broadly speaking, I can write you down a list of exactly what you need to do and roughly at what points. But you as an SEO managing that process, you're not just ensuring that you know what to do, is you got to make sure that people do the job when they need to. Because if you've migrated and something goes wrong, if someone else hasn't done the thing they need to, you as the SEO are still going to be the one answering for that broadly. So much about this is the buy-in, the stakeholder management, persuading other people to help you. You know, again, SEO is quite unique in that as the SEO, you're not the one that's often doing a lot of the stuff that's going to make the difference. You know, you're not a web developer usually, you're not a content writer usually, you're not usually the PR team, you're not the one sending out emails, you're not the person developing the product. You know, the SEO is trying to coordinate other people to behave in a way that's more conducive towards their goal. I mean, it helps everyone's goals, but if you're not very good at building that picture and you know, getting everyone else to see that your vision and how that it helps everybody, then SEO becomes very, very challenging. And yeah, when you're in really complicated businesses where, you know, even, you know, changing title tags can take 6 months, that changes absolutely everything about how and when you do things, who you communicate them to. You know, throwaway recommendations that you could do in 30 seconds on a WordPress website becomes things you don't ever touch because there's no point. And there's a lot of stuff like that to weigh up. And I think that's knowledge you gain through, by going through it. If you're a photographer that's doing a lot of local SEO, that isn't going to ever be your biggest challenge, which is, in some respects is quite cleansing and really quite useful. But then actually, if you spend every day lamenting all of the rubbish on Google Maps because there's poor reviews or rubbish listings, you might find yourself longing for a nice big enterprise client that doesn't rely on those map pins, but it's different challenges. Grass is all the time.
So what if somebody assesses their skills and they're in that larger bucket where they realize a lot of it's the persuasion part? Do you have spots that you point people to help them up their game with figuring that out?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, I think it depends where the specific person is in terms of their kind of journey and the troubles they're sort of having. I think the place that I've pointed most people to recently is SEO MBA, which Tom's, wasn't it? Yes, Tom's course, or his newsletter and his course. And I think that's a very, very good resource that's gets more and more people to think in a more of a consultative mode, but more importantly, learning to communicate upwards. And that's not something that the SEO industry teaches an awful lot of. Now, if you look more into consulting, McKinsey and others, and read a lot more of the texts where their kind of skills or their playbooks and methodologies, I think a lot more of that teaching is pretty much embedded in it. I think it's assumed that your job is as much just convincing someone to believe in you and buy into what it is you're doing. Whereas SEOs in the industry loves talking to other people about how to do SEO. And that's not always the same as convincing someone to help you employ 3 more people into your team, or, undertake an initiative that's not on the roadmap initially. And I think that's so I think moving outside of the SEO sphere and looking more into management, leadership, communication styles. One of the biggest things that helped me actually in my past is looking at sort of psychometrics and not Myers-Briggs, but there's one called Insights that's based on slightly more Jungian model, and it's kind of all based on sort of archetypes and where you fit. But if you're familiar with Myers-Briggs or anything like that, it's the similar instances. And what I'd very often recommend people do is understand firstly their own sort of personality type or preferences, not to pigeonhole someone based on 4 letters, but what are your tendencies? How do you like to be communicated with? How are you most likely to communicate with someone else? But then understand that same thing, how it functions with other people. And I think if you're presenting an audit, which is a very common thing for an SEO, and you're really happy that you've done like the most incredible audit, it's detailed, it's meticulous, it's well thought out, you found some really big things, your pride in that part there's a good chance that that's going to sabotage how you then present that to a stakeholder, especially if it's a project sponsor that's not an SEO that actually fundamentally doesn't care about the issues, they just want to see results. They aren't necessarily going to sit and have you present to them how amazing your audit is. They're going to cut straight to that. And what does it mean? Why should I care? And when we fix it, how quickly is the benefit going to come? And that as a lesson and learning that difference in communication styles, preferences of how people learn or want to take on knowledge, but also what are those people looking for? They're things that I don't think as SEOs we think enough about as an industry. I mean, there are people that do, and actually it's often in-house SEOs that I think learn this far quicker because they have to. But I think there's a really nice blend at that point to say, well, go and learn about NLP, about language, about communication, presentation skills, confidence, creating business cases, a lot of skills that have actually zero to do with SEO, but also have everything to do about getting SEO done.
And did you pick that up personally while you were at the agency, or was it something you picked up when you were on your own, or?
So actually I was lucky. The agency I was with at the time put us through that Insights process, and we actually had like a management training kind of sort of track that we were doing, which is where I got exposed to a lot of these teachings and learnings. And I've been fortunate to work with business mentors and trainers who teach on that since. And that actually was all with agency, and that was with a mode to actually helping people sort of progress out of their expertise into a slightly more kind of balanced role. So that's where I picked it up. But I think the thing you have to be very conscious with, and you have to kind of do afterwards, is keep that knowledge in the forefront and think, what do I do with that? So if you've got, if you're working with a client or you've got a manager who's particularly problematic, I don't know, if you find that no matter how many times you tell them something, they still ask you the same questions or they don't seem to get it. A lot of this comes down to is think back to what you've learned, those kind of sessions, that psychometric profiling you've done. What could be at the root of that? It's not that they're a pain and you're absolutely in the right, or it's not as if you're the one doing everything wrong and they're right. It's actually that your communication styles are wrong. So it's keeping those bits in the forefront of your mind and actually working with that. And that's something I've done very consciously and worked really hard at, because that helps those moments of introspection. Why am I not getting these recommendations through? Why is this report getting revised again? What am I missing? It's not SEO that will solve those problems. It is those other soft skills and teachings that will pull you out of it.
So it sounds like tactically you take a guess at what your client's communication style is, or what their slot is on Myers-Briggs or whatever personality trait program you're using.
Yeah, I mean, once you've done the work, kind of figured out where you sit on it, and the process then is to make yourself a little familiar with everyone else's. So you don't just learn about your own type and inclinations, you learn about others. Doesn't have to take very long. I mean, I find I intuit quite towards this sort of thing quite often. So I'm innately curious as to other people's preferences. But actually, when you're in a room with somebody, and even I'll have some meetings, and I've worked a lot in agency, so I've met with a lot of people and you pitch and discuss things with a lot of different seniorities. And usually even just running through the agenda for a meeting, you'll know who's what just by their body language, by the questions they ask. You might even find there'll be that one person in the room that says, but what does it all mean, before you've even gotten past the intro slide. And I think that teaches you an incredible amount about that, and tailoring what you then present, how you present to that. I mean, it takes a long time to learn and become sort of fluid at that, but picking that stuff up is just such an invaluable skill set. And I think, if you kind of think of agency account directors who just seem to have this way of building a rapport or doing incredibly well, they're doing this all the time. And they might not even know it as consciously as what they're doing. They might just sort of do it instinctively, but it is just what do these people need to know? How do I need to adjust my own communication styles to give them what they want?
Really interesting. I did a similar one. I don't remember the name, when I was at Ketchum at the big agency. And the part because I've done a ton of these actually over my lifetime, but the reason I liked this one in particular was that it had you figure out, or once you figured out what the personality preference was, it would talk through what that personality preference acted like in times of stress. And particularly in an agency environment, that was really helpful. It was also very interesting because there was one personality type that's basically the extreme extrovert kind of one, which I fall into. And it was you tend to get louder, maybe even scream on the extreme extrovert side when you're stressed. But anyway, the opposite of that was this very analytical analytical personality type. And what I found interesting is they don't like to hold eye contact with you, which I had noticed with we only had a few on our team, like literally 2, maybe out of 12. But I had noticed it with those people. And I thought it was odd because I'm not that. I'm the opposite. Right. And it was very interesting to manage those folks and on purpose, try not to hold their eyes. Like I had to coach myself in every interaction to look at their earlobe or whatever.
But it's that.
But it helped.
it's almost, it's not only, it's kind of knowing what might annoy you about that trait, as well as might alienate them about what you need. And it's, I
Yeah.
think the where people move in times of stress, because we can, so I'm probably closer on the analytical side of that spectrum, so I kind of much more, I'm likely to go quiet when I'm annoyed rather
Mhm.
than go kind of loud. And that's, but and very often the discussion I've had with kind of senior members of staff or my management is, just because I'm not jumping up and down furious about something doesn't mean I'm not cross or I'm not going to fix it. But that whole idea is we can be different things at once at different times. And I think it's, you have the behavior that you are most likely to default to, but then you have the behavior that you can kind of project and change to. And I think that changing, that process, that sort of morphing from one state into another is really valuable. It's so useful. Absolutely. I mean, and it's every I mean, even from how teams work together, that can be really super beneficial. But I mean, when we're talking about managing stakeholders and clients, I mean, what we're effectively doing is just saying, well, how do we get the most out of them? We we want them to be happy with what we're doing, but we need them to say yes to the things we're asking them to do. So it's there's I mean, I guess it sounds a little manipulative when you frame it in that sense, but it's just kind of, you're just greasing the wheels, or you're sort of laying down the runway for you to get what you need to.
Or maybe not adding friction, because you're right. The introverted trait, I'm trying to remember back to this training, but yes, it was holding the eyes actually added stress. So if you want a better conversation, don't stare them in the eyes, because it's going to stress them out. And maybe they'll get obsessed about the uncomfortableness of that unconsciously and not listen to what you're saying. Right. So
I think friction is such a great term when we kind of play it back against SEO as a skill set and a space, and an SEO is kind of where they are in a process of sort of abstracting it a little bit. But that's very often one of the biggest challenges you as an SEO has to kind of deal with, is that really you are friction for other business processes that are already happening. I mean, obviously in those businesses that are well established, and the phrase SEO first or search first, or however people might kind of call it now, is, you realistically, you've got to kind of integrate and work between and across teams, and try and kind of sneak in or add in your initiatives in a way that doesn't cause too much friction or doesn't cause things to stop kind of completely. And I've worked with some incredibly talented technical SEOs in the past, whose technical recommendations, they're not just friction, they are log jams, they are become serious issues or blockers in a process. And it's almost to a point that very often what they present or give as part of being an SEO is almost harder. You're creating more work than you need to, even just to interrogate the data and understand what the recommendation is. And it's so much of this is just, let's just smooth it on and through, this kind of push it all, make it all as digestible as possible, still have that difficult conversation, but don't try to be an absolute pain in the ass while you're doing
it. So changing gears a little bit, thinking back to this agency experience that we both have had, what do you recommend if somebody's in an agency and perhaps they aren't industry specific, and you as an SEO are getting thrown a totally new challenge in a new industry? Suddenly, well, this happened a lot in my agency anyway, but you'd get something, suddenly I have to do local SEO for some client where that's not what we normally did. How do you recommend SEO sort of ramp up their skill set to be able to handle that challenge and pivot?
Yeah, that's a good one. So, I mean, there's a couple of things, I guess. So the first one is, within most SEO niches, there are, really kind of these noteworthy pillars of, people that we would turn to. So in the local space, Greg Lifford in the States, huge kind of local SEO presence in that sense. But there's also David Mim, there's in the UK, there's Claire Carley, and there's a few other people that I know, because I follow a lot of people, and you realize the SEO industry is pretty tiny. I know if I ever had a local SEO question who I would ask, I'd make sure I kind of follow them, and whatever they talk about, I tend to look at. And that's so much the case. Like if tomorrow I had a local SEO client come in, that would be one of the first things I do, even going down to go and look, what have they shared on their feed for the last 2 weeks, And then, it's not just local SEO. If you want news SEO, turn to Barry Adams. If there's loads of people and it's slightly different. Obviously, the US SEO scene and the UK's, they overlap a little bit, but they're also quite distinct. But if you're doing something in the States, it won't take you long to find that person. So I'd say that's kind of very often the first thing that I would do, from a following perspective. But then it is these personal networks that you build. If you are in an agency that doesn't just do SEO, you're one of 2 or 3 SEOs in a big agency, and you've got to solve that problem yourself. Is you're building that personal network of like-minded people is so important. And very often that's what's differentiated the SEOs that are really successful. They're not, in my experience, is just networking with other people in the space. If you pay attention to SEO Twitter for too long, you can kind of sometimes feel maybe this is a little bit hostile and a bit a bit much, but actually, and I find all of the conferences I've been to and places that I've spoken and people that I mingled with, is most SEOs are brought together by the fact we all like doing the same thing, and it's this really kind of nerdy, weird area that isn't really applicable outside of our sphere, and that kind of people want to, broadly speaking, people want to help each other out, as long as you're not actively like kind of starting fights or something. So I would say actually seek out those people. Don't just sort of straight out say, hey, I need help, give me free help, which people do, but follow them, engage with their content, go to their talks, compliment them or speak about their talks, meetups. All of those kinds of things are so important, and they're not often really super quick. So if you've got a new local SEO client tomorrow, that knowledge, you have to backfill your knowledge with doing stuff. But actually, if you've signed a year's contract and you're going to be working with someone for a while, make friends in that space. And then what I would do in the interim is just upskill yourself with what's written. A lot of the tools providers in the SEO space are often really good sources for sort of immediate knowledge, because with content marketing being the way it is and SEO being the way it is, if you do a tool that is about building local citations or rank tracking on the map, there's a good chance that actually a lot of your blog is going to be about those things. So they're a great source of information. Obviously, if it's published by a tool that does the job, there's going to be a little bit of bias there, but very often it doesn't mean that the information you gain from that is invaluable. So I think it's a mixture of find the experts and follow them, build up your contacts in that space, but then just read what's about, and then it's up to you, that knowledge, and then the day-to-day getting on and doing it. I think even, if you hadn't done local SEO for 5 years and you picked it back up tomorrow, I think as soon as you learn, the differences in how the data sources influence the map, and, where is paid on a map versus where's organic, and, how do I report on those accurately based in Search Console? Once you've answered those base questions, it will start to click, I think. So I think there's if you're good at SEO and you understand the core principles of what the search engines are trying to do, you should be able to catch up with the rest.
Yeah, I actually definitely found that to be the case when I was the only SEO at Ketchum for a while, because I worked on 1,000 different industries. But yeah, the face to face, it was like, okay, now it's going to be natural gas. Great. I know nothing about natural gas. Let's do this.
TVs to natural gas to
and the next day it's like Slim Jims. Okay, cool, let's do this. I personally find, and it sounds like you do too, that COVID's a bummer, because the face-to-face search shows are so much fun in relation to just geeking out with other people who care about what you care about, but then also so helpful in relation to the real life human relationships you can build at those conferences. I've had some really stunning sort of results. I don't know, support afterwards, I guess is a better way of saying it, from folks that I've met at shows. So now that we're all stuck at home, and some of us might be for a while, I still have unvaccinated kids, because she's too little. Where do you go now? Have you found online spaces? This is where I plug Tech SEO Women's Group, because the Slack and Facebook there is amazing, and it is a place where you can just ask a random question and people help you. I was floored. I've had people that were just free. They're top of the industry too. And they're like, hey, I'm free right now. You want to do a web chat? Let's walk through it. I'm like, okay, amazing.
That is awesome.
Yes,
Yeah,
let's do that. But
very
that's
cool.
obviously you have to be a girl to get in. You have to be a woman. So what's on the other side? Do you know of any online spaces where maybe it's safe to ask questions and
Yeah, I mean,
you know?
it's since obviously since COVID, since pandemic, people kind of not doing face to face as much. I mean, there are some, I guess, sort of proxies or versions of that. I think the finding the right Slack group or even WhatsApp groups or Signal or Telegram. I think they're that whole these little communities have become a lot more fragmented, and I think if you can find yourself into the one that's got your like the people who are willing to help, it's a safe space, that can be amazing. If anything, I think that can give you something that you couldn't even have got even by doing the face to face. I wouldn't say it's a complete replacement, but I've personally found I have a handful of WhatsApp and Signal groups, one's on analytics, others on technical SEO, others about Data Studio and other things. And yeah, they're very often where I dip into if I've got a specific issue, or likewise other people might chime in with problems and we kind of feed them back. And that's very cool. That's very useful. I think Twitter and LinkedIn in particular are two still very good kind of networks just to see what people are doing. I mean, went to Brighton SEO last year, the first in-person one that's been held in the UK since the pandemic, and the amount of people that I bumped into who also followed me on various other socials, we might not have spoken that much, but they kind of know enough about what I've done. So I took up jump rope in pandemic, and actually what I spent more time talking to people about at Brighton was the fact that I'd done that rather than SEO, and that's where that sense of community and kind of staying connected thing can really work as well. So I think there's that balancing act is there. There still is no true replacement for those face-to-face interactions, really. But I think if you want to connect more with the industry, if you want to talk to people more about it and you don't know where to start, I'd say absolutely start there. I think that the Women in Tech SEO one is absolutely fantastic, and it's given a lot of people something they wouldn't have had before. So I think that if you're 50% of the planet who could make use of that, then absolutely give it a go. I can't think of a reason why not. But even if you're not that 50%, there's still so many else out there. It's the internet. I mean, you just go onto Twitter, and even Twitter Spaces. There's now, I see them 2 or 3 times a week. There's a group of SEOs with some well-renowned, internationally sort of SEOs in them. Join in, ask a question. And I think that's what anyone ever wants to do. As I said, it's a small industry. So even if you think someone's, top of their game, international speaker, the industry is not that big where they're not going to appreciate you dropping in and asking them a question, or, as long as you're respectful about it, I think absolutely go and do it. Start it tomorrow if you're not already.
Even if they're top of their game, the space changes so quickly.
Well,
yeah.
that is true. I mean, there is a slightly hubris type element of if you're top of your game and you kind of get caught out, there is that possibility.
Yeah. So coming back to this sort of goal setting, do you have a process that you use with your team members? And is there a process that you use to help them move their skill set more effectively? And is that any different? Because I know you mentor people outside of your team too. So do you have a different process that you use for mentoring other people? And I've come back to this because there was a mentoring program in Tech SEO Women's Group for a while, and I think they're going to redo it again this year.
Yeah, I think so. I'll start with if it's kind of members of a team. So I think if you're in an agency, you've got a team, or the way that I would usually work. Well, firstly, we've got to assume that everyone has a clear job specification, or job spec, we'd call it in the UK, where it just says what does doing my job look like, and then what does exceeding at my job look like. And I not everyone has that, not everyone produces it, but I think it should be there, because I think it gives you a really clear idea of, well, what do I need to do to just fulfill my day-to-day, what kind of work functions, and then if I want to grow, develop, and then move up, what do I need to excel at and develop more on. And I think if you've got those in place and you're managing a team, the goal setting part it's just a lot simpler, because you kind of work with your line manager or supervisor, or if you're the line manager or supervisor, you work with your team to then go, right, well, do we feel that these are being met? Are you kind of matching it or not? And you can do this process well, or you can do it incredibly badly. I've seen people use job specifications as a stick to beat someone with when they're not doing the job right. And then I've seen employees come in and say, yeah, I'm doing it all, when they're quite blatantly not. And it's kind of, if you're both approaching it at that take of, well, that's kind of, we want the same things. We want growth, and we want you to, people to perform the best they can. How close are we to that? And that's fairly straightforward. And I think that when we come into the goal setting, there's many different frameworks for goal setting and lots of different approaches. But my favorite is the SMART methodology, because it just makes sure that, what is it? Is my goal specific? Is it measurable? Is it I've forgotten the A.
Achievable, I think.
Achievable, thank you. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Is it relevant to your overall kind of growth trajectory, and time based? When is it going to be done by? And I think that's literally that's just kind of complex as it gets. And very often that process of walking people through SMART or getting someone to do it, you'll work out really quickly, is that actually an important goal, or has that just been put on there just because? And it's that time-based accountability part is when you really learn, actually, I'm going to do this. I'm going to learn a new programming language because I think it's going to help me, but it's going to take me 4 hours a week. I've got to do it over the next 3 months. And by the end of 3 months, I need to have built an application that will help me do X task. I don't know, I'm just making up as I go along. But you kind of then realize, well, actually, am I going to have time to do that? Is it going to fit in with everything else? Do I really need that? Or do I think I need that? And that process is so valuable. But what it often needs to come back to, or what I like to sort of merge it into, and it's something that was taught to me when I was kind of going through these journeys in agencies, you have your professional ones, but you have your personal ones too. And that's when, it doesn't matter who you're kind of mentoring or helping, is that realism that we some people, as much as you might enjoy work, as much as you might enjoy SEO and kind of love your craft, you're doing this to get paid, to feel satisfaction, to achieve certain things that should also then relate into other things. And I think it's just weighing up the goals in relation to both. So yeah, if it's in an agency or in a team where you've got a clear job specification, that's where I would often start. Obviously, if you don't have a good job specification, that's something that can be harder to navigate, because you kind of, if you're in that position where you've got to try and tell your boss that you don't think the job specification's right and they've written it, for example, they're always interesting conversations. But where I would then go from here, and if it was mentoring with people outside of a team, or is think, well, what job title are you going for? What's your aspiration? I don't know. Is it head of department? Is it a senior SEO's position? Well, go and find 10 job specs for that. Look for people advertising for those jobs. It'll have a list. I mean, obviously, if it's a recruitment piece, it'll have a list of requirements that are far too long and often contradictory. But you can pull down this list and work out, what does the market say I need to be able to do my job well. And that's hopefully that's a validating, kind of helpful thing to do. Sometimes it could be a little demoralizing if you're over pitching where you think you should be, but that will at least give you an idea of, well, what does the market think? Because actually none of this is absolute. Like, what one organization may think is mandatory, another may be an optional. I've seen some internal SEOs also have to know how to fix the email server when it goes down, or unjam the printer, and it's like, they're not SEO jobs. Or they need to be proficient at Photoshop. It's like, nothing in SEO takes place in Photoshop, I can guarantee you there. So, but it's just understanding where that sits, and it's using that kind of barometer. And for those people that I mentor that aren't in that structured kind of environment, it's down to, where do you want to go, and what are they going to expect of you, and then how do we close those skill gaps? Or do we not need to close the skill gap? Do you just need to reframe your story? Do you need to rework your CV or repitch a case study? And it's just, sometimes people will have the experience and they just need to kind of suck it up and go out there and go and knock on some doors. Other people, they might need to work at it for a bit longer, but at least if they know what they're developing and what people are asking for, when they feel ready, they can tell that story a little better.
I think it's also okay in the industry to realize that you don't like doing certain things. I mean, I guess it depends on, where you're at employment wise. Obviously, I do my own thing,
Yeah.
so I really can pick whatever I want to do. But just realizing, and I'm also further along in my career, but there are certain things I'm not good at. I tried to do development and I miss punctuation all the time, which sometimes means some things don't work. So if I'm going to QA code in that sort of detail, probably not what I'm going to be happy doing because it's really challenging for me. Not really great at it. And I think that's okay. I'm good at a lot of other things.
Mm.
Right.
But even that ability to say I'm not good at that and that's okay, that's such a hard won position to be sat in, because I know, I mean, the word imposter syndrome or phrase imposter syndrome is used a lot within SEO, and I think that might be because of the sorts of people that are often getting into it. But a lot of people are so worried that they can't say I don't know, that because they'll be judged as being poor at their job, or, well, if you don't know, find someone who can. You know, when you've done the job for 2 years, you think it's you as a failing, but I think actually once you've done this for 5 years, 10 years or more, of course there's stuff we don't know. You know, there's people in Google that don't even know the answer to the question about how Google runs. So anyone else, it's just having that confidence to know that, and that's not learned. I think that's earned, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Also, there's other things that bring you joy, right? And if you spend all of your time really trying to get good at the thing that does not bring you joy, your life is going to be miserable. When instead, SEO is a big space and you can specialize in a lot of things. I know both of us do technical SEO, but you could be doing link building, and you could be working at a link building SEO agency, or you could be in content and that's your jam, or digital PR or whatever. You don't have, not everyone has to code Python, I guess, is really where I'm coming down to.
100, yeah. And I think the other thing with SEO, and it's, even if you enjoy juggling that spreadsheet for 8 hours, that's actually super fine, because the skills that you develop, you're fulfilling a really good function. Other people I know, just they're in their happy place when they're optimizing metadata. Now, sitting at 8 hours worth of metadata is not something I want to be doing, but I have done it. I feel like I've earned my stripes, with those sort of vast spreadsheets of kind of content. And it is just kind of means to an end, but you do also need to go through and experience all the stuff that intimidates you or you don't like as well, I think, too. It's I've kind of done lots. I mean, for me personally, like that link building outreach side is something that I've done enough to know what good looks like in that role, but I've also done enough to know that I'm not the person that thrives in that. I mean, it's chasing journalists or bloggers is, I don't have the chops for it. Frankly, it's not kind of my way. But if I find someone who does, I usually say, right, we need to employ that person. They'd be great on that team because of what we're seeing. And it's just knowing that. I'll reframe that. As the SEO teams get bigger, as it becomes more and more expected, I think the need for an SEO to wear all of the hats at once is becoming less. That SEO who is a link builder, who is a technician, who is a content writer, who can also edit in Photoshop and fix the email servers, that's a mold that shouldn't exist or won't exist, I think, in another sort of 5 or so years' time, because there aren't enough good SEOs who do specialize. Let alone those who are happy to be the general sort of generalist kind of digital person. And I think businesses will learn that really quickly when their SEOs start feeling like, actually, I'm not doing the stuff that gives me joy, I'm going elsewhere. And we see that. We're seeing that a lot at the moment, so much. If it's a really good time to have a couple of years, even a year's worth of SEO experience under your belt, because you can go and find the right thing. Just the risk is that, as always happens in these scenarios, people get over promoted a little too quickly because there's not as many people about. And if you do get over promoted into the wrong kind of role, and it can really knock your kind of confidence and professional sort of standing, and that can often cause you more damage. So it's just being realistic, but also knowing that, heck, I've got a really sought after skill that not many people have. I need to leverage that for me too.
Yeah, totally. Well, so this has been an amazing conversation, as I knew it would be, because you and I have chatted earlier and spent the time left. We're like, wow, where'd all the time go? But I do have a couple standard questions I always ask my podcast guests. So as marketers, I know we're constantly thinking about our customers and what makes them tick. So, is there anything that you've seen recently with any of the clients you've worked on that was really kind of an aha moment about customer psychology?
So I've had two. So one of them was doing some keyword research for a brand that sells sort of facial masks or face masks, like cosmetics and these sort of cleansing masks and bits. That not something I usually have an awful lot of overlap with, but doing the SEO thing, kind of doing keyword research in the tools, and then it's that moment where you Google that term, and kind of search for face masks, hit go, and then you realize that every single one of the face mask rankings on position one are all face masks to protect against COVID or airborne sort of viruses or particulates. And then you think, I mean, as a searcher, as a customer, I may have searched for a face mask because I was looking for one, but immediately I'm not going to get the results that I think I want. So that is a keyword and a ranking. This isn't a new moment, but just for this particular niche, just as a lovely poignant reminder that I don't want to rank for that term. The customer, isn't going to find me there. They are going to refine. And actually that particular moment was, what's the most likely refined term to find that facial mask, for example, and who ranks there? And that, for me, that's always, I talk about keywords and keyword intent long enough, but if you really want to understand your customer's search journey, you need to know, well, what SERPs are they actually finding? What are the results actually coming up? And for me, that is an absolutely brilliant one. And then the other one, and it's come back to me quite a lot with many different customers, is that working out that actually so very often, like the company business has been so hell-bent on ranking well for particular kind of keywords, but the customers in that space, they're not searching generically for that product and or service, because I think this particular one, there's only like 10 other companies. So these landing pages that we're trying to optimize for non-brand kind of keywords were never going to work, because actually the only people in the space that would have the buying power or the decision making would never search and consume in that fashion. And actually, I think those aha moments and understanding the customers that well are showing that, well, actually, we were doing an integrated campaign. We moved budget away from SEO because there was no point. There wasn't a lot of point. That we then sat down with the sales team and said, who do you speak to? And they're like, well, these people have been in industry in 10 years. We normally, 9 out of 10 of our customers, we meet at industry trade shows twice a year pre-COVID. And it's like, well, okay, I need advertising that's going to target those people, not me hoping that I'm going to rank better for this keyword based on all of this additional content I'm going to pump into the site with, because the customers don't need that content. And they're both, I guess that both of these things are variations on a theme, which is just understanding that purchase journey and where that person is. And it's very kind of thinking about the human making the search, rather than this search has 50,000 a month on average, I want to rank for that because I want a slice of that 50,000 people. It's like, well, but what happens if they're not the people you need to be speaking to? And I don't know. I still don't think it's something SEOs think about enough. And I think because it gives me an aha moment every now and again, I think it's one thing that I still need reminding of periodically, just to kind of help show me that, just to kind of help, because the doing it via search volume is such an easy way out, isn't it? I mean, one of the keyword tools shows you there's 50,000 people searching. Okay, cool. That's a really easy decision to make, but doesn't mean it's the right one. So I think,
Yeah, no, I think that's very, very insightful. Sometimes SEO is not always the solution for everything, even as much as we love it.
Absolutely.
So what's the win or resource that you want to share with your audience today?
I think because of what we've spoken about, I think I've already sort of name checked it, but the resource that I want to share is the learningseo.io. It's such a sort of well selected and thorough kind of source of knowledge and information. We, as an industry, there's no kind of definitive qualification. There's no universal acknowledgement of certain ways of learning, really. So anywhere that reviews, quality checks, and then pulls together the learnings that goes on in this sort of disparate space, for me, is hugely valuable. Not just if you're a beginner, but if you need to kind of keep up with things as you go. So I think I would recommend everyone takes a look at that if they haven't already.
I know, and she keeps updating it. I don't know how this woman
I,
finds the time in her day.
I don't know. I say that to her quite often, but she's got a time machine or a clone. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
she's very productive. That's all I can say.
benefits us all as well.
Yeah, totally. So how can people learn more about you?
So a couple of places, I guess. So Chris Green SEO on Twitter is where I am most frequently, although I've been a little quieter on there. Sort of in COVID times, I guess. But I think that's where, if I'm pontificating about something search-based, it's going to be there. But my DMs are also open, and it's one of the best ways of reaching me if anyone does have a question or wants to chat. But then I've got chris-green.net is my site and blog. That's got a bit more about me, what I do, but I've the professional focus for SEO skills blog that I've done is up there. I also did one last year, which is talking about how to become a senior SEO in an agency, which I had a lot of people reach out to me quietly and say that that's really helped them, which is super cool. And that's also where I'm going to be publishing. I'm doing a slightly more in-depth SEO skills question kind of quiz. So not just the self-appraisal on where do I feel confident, but this is going to be breaking it down into a couple of kind of core SEO scenarios and how confident are you to be able to do this independently or not. And actually what I'm doing in the background, what I'm trying to build into it is it helps people understand is strategy where they need to learn more. Do they need to learn more in measurement and reporting or technical or content? So that's going to be a fairly hopefully useful and chunky piece that I might even try and develop into a tool. So I'm saying it now, so it holds me accountable. So I need to actually get on and launch it. But it's
Great.
It's in the back burner. So so my blog there when that comes live.
Great. That sounds amazing. Thank you so much for sharing some time with us. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah.
That's great.
Great. Thanks so much for listening. To find out more about the podcast and what we're up to, go to digitalmarketingvictories.com. And if you like what you heard, subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Rate us, comment, and share the podcast, please. I'm always looking for new ideas, topics, and guests. Email us at digitalmarketingvictories@gmail.com or DM us on Twitter at DMVictories. Thanks for listening.